Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where spirit bombs ensue, but today, or I should say yesterday, I beat a game. So I kind of want to talk about it, but you know, in the spirit of beating the 3 GTA games, of course, the only logical way to follow up was with the LEGO Harry Potter collection, right? Because that only makes sense, right? But yeah, I played the LEGO Harry Potter collection on the Nintendo Switch. This collection includes 2 sets of games, which is LEGO Harry Potter years 1 through 4, originally released in 2010, and then LEGO Harry Potter years 5 through 7, originally released in 2017. Years 1 through 4 cover the first 4 movies, while years 5 and 7 covered the last 4 movies. Originally, these games were released on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and the Nintendo Wii, and then in the collection edition, they were released on the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS4. The game is published by Warner Brother and developed by Traveler's Tale. Traveler's Tale's pedigree is pretty much LEGO games. I don't know if they really have a pedigree outside of that, but that's pretty much what I know them for, at least. But in total, the entirety of the collection took me 35 hours to beat. I suspect that the one that was longer or took more time was the years 5 through 7, but we'll talk about that when we get into these games. But long and short of my opinion on these games is that they're pretty good. There is one that's better than the other. Years 1 through 4 specifically is, I think, way better than years 5 through 7, but overall, it's a fun little collection. I enjoyed my time with it a decent amount. I do have my complaints, but most of my complaints come with years 5 through 7. Like I said, we'll talk about that when we get to that, though. But in terms of the graphics and performance of these games, they do differ slightly. Years 1 through 4 do look decent, to be honest. It really just looks like a LEGO game, and honestly, the performance on it runs just fine. It runs at like 60, maybe 30, I don't know. Can't really tell the difference. I think it's 60 that it's running at, and it just runs fine, which is to be expected, honestly, because, I mean, it's not that great looking in the game, but it's a fine looking game nonetheless. Years 5 through 7 looks a decent amount better than years 1 through 4, but it does run a little bit worse. I think really, in all reality, years 1 through 4 runs at 60 frames per second, while years 5 through 7 runs at 30 frames a second, so that difference is pretty noticeable when you jump from one game to the other, but it does look better. It just runs a bit worse, though. But in terms of the graphics, both games look fine. In terms of the performance, though, years 5 through 7 is slightly worse than years 1 through 4. But in terms of the music and voice acting, the music for both games is, in all reality, just Harry Potter music, so there isn't a whole hell of a lot to talk about. If you play through this game, the soundtrack is going to be familiar if you've ever watched the movies, because it's literally the soundtrack from the movies just imported into the game. It's quite literally just the same soundtrack that you're familiar with from the movies. Is it an amazing soundtrack? I mean, that's up to debate, honestly, between people, whether they like the music in Harry Potter or not. I think I've heard it enough to the point where it just doesn't have an effect on me, and I really just don't have an opinion. But I mean, the music is just all the music that you know from the movies. Whether you like it or not, that's kind of up to your conjecture. Like I said, listening to it, you know, it was kind of nostalgic from the movies, but I really didn't have any outstanding opinion on it, just because these are songs I've heard so much from the past. But in terms of the voice acting, there is none. This is a classic LEGO game pre when they added voice actors in, and really it's just mumble. So there really aren't voice actors in this game, and honestly, that mumble is like not a lot to talk about or go off of. So in terms of the music and voice acting, in terms of the music, it's Harry Potter music. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. In terms of voice acting, there is none, so there really isn't anything to talk about. But in terms of the story and characters, this is another point where there's just not a hell of a lot to talk about for either game, to be honest. Years 1 through 4 is an abridged version of the first 4 movies, and then years 5 through 7 are an abridged version of the last 4 movies. Now, this game does cover both Deathly Hallow parts. It does do parts 1 and 2 instead of kind of doing a singular chapter for them. It actually has 2 separate chapters, kind of like how they did the movies. But years 1 through 4 are a lot more lighthearted, as you would remember from the movies, and as you remember, kind of years 5 through 7 are a decent amount darker. And that is kind of reflected, and it's kind of surprising in a LEGO game that they actually kind of lean into that darker theme. I was figuring that they kind of downplay it and kind of just making a LEGO game that they kind of downplay those dark themes, but instead they really lean into it, and the game is actually kind of surprisingly kind of leans into that kind of dark themes of the last 4 movies. But I'm not complaining in particular, I'm just surprised that they leaned into that instead of, you know, going with the more lighthearted LEGO fare that they usually go with. Now, that being said, they do have all the kind of tropey LEGO shit that they usually do in the other games, so it does have those kind of like lighthearted and laughable moments, but it still does kind of lean into that dark theme a decent amount nonetheless. But years 1 through 4 lean a lot more heavy into that kind of tropey LEGO shit. Since they have more of a lighthearted atmosphere, they kind of go off that and do do all the funny, weird Lego shit. So it's all pretty intact in terms of the story. Not having watched the movies in a while, the story was kind of hard to follow, and that's kind of for Lego games. They don't really explain the story. It's kind of like an abridged version of the story. So if you haven't watched the movies in a while, it'll be kind of hard to follow along since they really don't explain anything. But I did enjoy reliving those moments. It is abridged, and it is done in a kind of a goofy Lego manner. Obviously, people who die don't really die in like the typical fashion. They kind of die in a Lego fashion, like a funny type of way. That being said, other than that, there's just not a lot to talk about since it's just the story from the movies, abridged and really unexplained and kind of done up in the goofy Lego fashion. But in terms of the characters as well, there's not a whole hell of a lot to talk about because the characters aren't given a whole crazy amount of personality. You're kind of just expected to know their personalities from the movies and just kind of have that knowledge rolling into the games. They're not built up with any sort of personality. Only real thing to speak about characters, of course, all of them are given the weird goofy Lego trope of characters and they all have their kind of goofy moments. But besides that, it's not like during the games they're given a lot of character building or anything because it's a Lego game. You're just kind of expected to know the source material going into it, and if you don't, you'll kind of be lost. But in terms of the story and characters, it's all the same from the movies, and it's really just the stories an abridged and kind of goofy version of the movies. Like I said, worth noting, it's if you don't know the movies, they don't explain a whole hell of a lot. So if you haven't watched the movies, you'll be quite lost. But in terms of the gameplay, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this video and of the Lego games in general. But overarchingly talking about both games, if you know Lego games and you know their collectathons, in years 1 through 4 I think I got 56% completion, and then in years 5 through 7 I got 59% completion. Both games really lean into heavily that kind of collectathon that Lego games usually go for, but I think years 1 through 4 do it better than years 5 through 7 because in terms of exploration for collectathons and everything like that, the castle in years 1 through 4 is a lot more fun to explore than it is in 5 through 7, and I feel like the atmosphere for years 1 through 4 is a lot better as well. But the collectathon aspect is fun if you're a completionist. I think you'll enjoy these games quite a bit, but in general you probably played a lot of Lego games as well if you have a completionist mindset. But as well as talking about the games in general, this is the era of Lego games where the camera is a fixed perspective. As I understand, in some later Lego games they give you a unfixed camera. This game has a fixed camera, kind of what you'd expect from a Lego game, and that's throughout the entirety of the game. But in terms of both the games as well, they lean heavily into puzzle and platforming rather than combat. Now I know the Lego Star Wars games, which I played a hell of a long time ago, it's been a while, but I did play them, and those lean quite a bit into combat. Now years 5 through 7 have a bit more combat than years 1 through 4, but they still lean heavily into platforming, and as well they lean heavily into the puzzle aspect of the game. I can enjoy that for what it is, and honestly it was enjoyable. I enjoyed doing the puzzles, I enjoyed the platforming. Just know that some Lego games lean into combat a lot heavier, and this is not the case here. They really enjoy doing platforming and as well puzzling in this game. But another overarching thing to talk about in these games is the spells. Now they kind of cheat out with the Wingardium Leviosa since that's technically kind of like the Force from the Lego Star Wars game, but other than that they give you a lot of unique spells in this game. Everything you know from the movie, they have a lot of those spells. A lot of the spells in years 1 through 4 carry over to 5 and 7, and 5 and 7 only has like one unique spell to it, which is kind of a letdown, but nonetheless, in terms of the spells as well, it kind of seems like in years 5 through 7 they expected you to play years 1 through 4 because they up front give you 4 spells. They don't really explain a lot about them, but that's in contrast to years 1 through 4 where they slowly and progressively give you more and more spells for you to use throughout the game. In years 5 through 7 they're a lot more upfront about giving you spells, but a lot of these spells are really cool to get because once you get them, there's a lot of puzzling to do throughout the castles to kind of unlock shit and figure out stuff and like get new characters or gold bricks or solve puzzles, etc. It's a lot of fun to solve puzzles with these spells, and it's really satisfying as well. Now I think it's more satisfying in years 1 through 4 just because they do it better. It's still satisfying in years 5 through 7, I just feel like it's less so. Now in terms of gameplay in general, I'll kind of break down parts that I liked from years 1 through 4 as well as stuff that I liked through through 5 and 7. I feel like years 1 through 4 were a lot more creative with the gameplay, and they did a lot more like unique gameplay elements than 5 through 7 did. Years 5 through 7 feels like it didn't do a lot of unique gameplay elements, but years 1 through 4, I mean, they had like an underwater level that felt like it was inspired by Donkey Kong Country, and as well they had like a Metroid inspired like 2D side-scrolling level that was really cool, and that was years 1 through 4, and it felt really inspired. And that inspiration feels like absent in years 5 through 7, which is kind of disappointing. But as well, I feel like the atmosphere in years 1 through 4 is a lot better than it is in 5 through 7. Now, years 1 through 4 has like a really just kind of upbeat and happy and really just a good atmosphere with the castle. It's a completely different atmosphere from years 5 through 7, which just kind of feels vapid, honestly. That lighthearted and kind of enjoyable Lego spirit is really present in years 1 through 4, while 5 through 7 it just feels absent and kind of empty, to be honest. It's kind of disappointing, honestly. The atmosphere is just what makes years 1 through 4, and once you play 5 through 7 it just kind of feels disappointing. But in general though, I just kind of feel like years 5 through 7 is less inspired than years 1 through 4. Things like the broomsticks were used in years 1 through 4, and they're used pretty heavily, and they're used for puzzling aspects, and in years 5 through 7 they're just completely absent. But as well, another thing that I think is kind of inferior in years 5 through 7 is the pacing. Now, each game has 4 chapters, and in each chapter are 6 levels. Each level covers a part of the story of each chapter, which, like I said, it's 8 chapters overall. That covers all 8 movies. And the pacing in years 1 through 4 I feel like is a lot better. It's just a lot faster and it feels a lot smoother. Years 5 through 7 takes the pace a lot slower. And I feel like it has a lot more filler in between the main story points, that it's just kind of weird to have this kind of weird filler in between, because it feels like it's just padding out the game unnecessarily. But by the last 2 chapters of years 5 through 7, that filler just kind of disappears. But the first 2 chapters are an absolute drag in that game and feel like they have a lot of filler. But overall, in terms of the gameplay, I feel like years 1 through 4 are better, but overall, it really is a traditional Lego game. If you played any traditional Lego game, then you'll kind of be familiar with the gameplay. It's just very Harry Potter inspired. It does do a lot more with exploration though in the hub world with the Hogwarts castle, which I think is kind of cool. It is more puzzle based and platform based than it is combat based, which is something to know. But as well, I think that 5 through 7 kind of drags on, while years 1 through 4 have a better pace. But overall, they're both fun games nonetheless. But overall, my opinions on the Lego Harry Potter collection is that it was a decent amount of fun, to be honest. I enjoyed years 1 through 4 more than I did 5 through 7, but nonetheless, the entire package is still pretty enjoyable. And honestly, I paid $25 for it, which is kind of a steal because I got 35 hours out of it, and it was a pretty enjoyable 35 hours, to be honest. So if you're a fan of Lego, if you're a fan of just Harry Potter in general, I think this is absolutely worth a pickup, just because it's fun, honestly. And it's just an enjoyable and lighthearted time. But thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.